There's a difference between being strong in the gym and being strong when you're rolling hard on the mat. And unfortunately, I see a lot of grappling athletes getting it all wrong. You might be jacked, you might be hitting a bunch of PRs, but if you're still getting folded on the mat, that's a sign that the training that you're doing in the gym isn't transferring to the strength that you need on the mat. I ask my followers to send me their favorite Jiu Jitsu strength exercises. I'm gonna be breaking down each one, going over what works, what doesn't work, and what is simply just a giant waste of time. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Settlage Strength Podcast. I'm fired up and excited to be hanging out with you guys today. This is going to be a pretty fun episode because the way I've been structuring these podcasts is I'll go through like a series where I do like some very dense, information-heavy podcasts, and then I'll do some episodes that are just kind of about having fun. And so in today's episode, we're going to be doing an overrated, underrated podcast episode. I asked you guys on Instagram to send me your favorite jiu-jitsu strength exercises or just exercises you wanted me to look at and assess on whether or not they are overrated or underrated. And the way it's going to work is I have a list of 53 different exercises that people have sent in. Some of them I just grabbed from the internet. And what we're going to define as overrated doesn't mean it's a bad exercise, just means that it might be getting a little too much hype for the value that it actually provides. And how we're going to define underrated is an exercise that just doesn't get enough recognition for the value that it provides. And then if something is pretty even across the board, like I don't see it as overrated or underrated, we'll just say like, hey, 2 thumbs up, it's a good exercise, it's appropriately rated. And I think a good example of this is the very first exercise that was sent in, the trap bar deadlift. I think the trap bar deadlift is appropriately rated for grappling athletes. It's great because it's, you could build up your lower body strength. It's great for max effort work, dynamic effort work. For athletes, especially grapplers that have lower back issues, the dynamic effort deadlift. The trap bar deadlift can be great because you're able to keep the weight around your body as opposed to in front of your body like you would have to with a straight bar. So by keeping the weight around your body, you can change your starting position a little bit where you put more load on your quads, a little bit less load on your lower back, and a lot more load on your upper back. It can be great for building strength. And it's something that I'm trying to think. I think I have every single one of my athletes at some point do trap bar deadlift work if they have access to a trap bar. It's a great exercise. I don't think it's overrated. I don't think people are hyping it up more than it needs to be. And at this point, I think most grapplers are aware of the trap bar deadlift, so I would say it's appropriately rated. Next exercise is the Bulgarian split squat. This was kind of a tough one for me because I wouldn't say that the Bulgarian split squat is overrated or underrated because I think people know that it's a good exercise. I think it's overhated. People are always complaining about oh my gosh, Bulgarian split squats, worst exercise ever. And I've just never understood that. I love Bulgarian split squats. I freaking love them. Whether they're with dumbbells, kettlebells, a barbell, safety squat bar, doing them through a full range of motion, partial range of motion, heel elevated, floating heel, it doesn't matter what style of Bulgarian split squat, I'm game. So I think these are appropriately rated. I would say it's one of the best strength exercises that I have found for grapplers because you are working in a unilateral position where you're only working one leg at a time. I think grapplers, you look at the Bulgarian split squat and it's appropriately rated for strength, but I would say it's underrated for mobility. The hip stretch that you get on that back leg is fantastic. And so the Bulgarian split squat not only is a great strength exercise, but I'd say it's underrated in the context of it being a good mobility exercise as well. Next exercise is going to be the pull-up. Pull-ups, I think are fantastic. I think the way people train pull-ups can cause some issues. I think if you're doing pull-ups and you're doing all these kipping pull-ups and stuff, we're not competing in CrossFit, we can just do strict pull-ups and be totally fine. So I would say that kipping pull-ups at this point are probably overrated. Regular strict pull-ups are appropriately rated, and then throw chin-ups in there as well. The way I look at it is pull-ups are always going to be palms forward, chin-ups are always going to be palms backwards. Next exercise is going to be the kettlebell swing. I think when it comes to overall strength development, the kettlebell swing is a little bit overrated for strength. So raw, absolute strength, force output, kettlebell swing is a little overrated. I think it's best used for explosive power development. It doesn't always, to me, act as like the best strength exercise that I can find. So whenever I'm using kettlebell swings, kettlebell swings, if you do them heavy, you are going to get stronger in the sense that you're building physical resilience or improving your ability to produce force. But when we talk about like how the kettlebell swing drives up absolute strength, it doesn't do very well when compared to something like a trap bar deadlift or a Bulgarian split squat. So kettlebell swing for strength is overrated, but I think it's appropriately rated for speed, power, explosiveness, all of that good stuff. Next exercise is the back squat. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but I honestly think the barbell back squat is a little bit overrated for grappling strength. And this is coming from a guy that loves powerlifting. This is coming from a guy that, I love powerlifting. I'll put it that way. Like, I am not a powerlifting hater. I'm not a barbell hater or anything like that. You're never going to find me making a video, reviewing someone's deadlift and saying, like, this person is going to be in a wheelchair in 10 years because of the compression forces on their spine. I'm not about that. I will say, though, I think for grapplers, I've just seen the barbell back squat cause more issues than what it's worth. I think when you're cramming your elbows and you're cramming your shoulders under a straight barbell, that can be pretty tough. It can cause like some elbow tendonitis. If you don't have the shoulder mobility to get your hands back there, that can be really uncomfortable. Jiu Jitsu guys, their shoulders and elbows are always banged up, so putting that kind of stress on the shoulders and elbows, I think, can be a bit of a problem. The other thing with the back squat too is that as I've gotten older and as I've matured and grown as a coach, I just don't think everyone is built to back squat. I think everyone should be able to do a back squat, but that doesn't mean that someone is built to get a ton of value out of maxing out their back squat multiple times a month. And, I think I would fit in that camp. I don't really do barbell back squats anymore. I can't even remember the last time I did a barbell back squat, like a powerlifting style back squat where I had like my belt and knee sleeves and wrist wraps and all that stuff. And so it can be great for building lower body strength. It can be great for hypertrophy, but I do think it's a little overrated for grapplers. I think there are a lot of other exercises that do an equal, if not better job at giving you a greater bang for your buck when it comes to building lower body strength. I don't know if anyone on this list talked about specialty bars. I'm kind of looking at this list for the very first time a little bit. So we got a live reaction here. But I'm not a fan of barbell back squats, but I'm a big fan of using specialty bars instead. So like a safety squat bar squat, a cambered bar back squat, a Duffalo bar back squat. I think all of those are awesome because those change the loading profile of the movement a little bit, and a lot of those bars give you a different option for where you can place your hands. So I do a ton of safety squat bar work because I love that I can just hold on to the handles in front and I don't have to cram my shoulders and elbows under a straight bar. I'm also a big fan of a cambered bar where imagine like a big U where there's a bar that sits on your back, but the weight hangs underneath you a little bit. What that does is that puts a little bit more weight into your hips, your glutes, and your posterior chain. And I love that bar. Like my heaviest squats of all time have been done with a cambered bar, and I freaking love the cambered bar. So back squat, overrated. Specialty bar squats, underrated. Next exercise, bench press. I'd say bench press is appropriately rated. However, there are some camps that like to hate on the bench press and they say it's not functional because, if anyone bench presses me off their chest, I'll armbar them. And I think that's just it's such a ridiculous argument. It's almost like, hey, we shouldn't do curls because if I'm in an armbar and I try to curl, they're just going to break my arm. It's like, yeah, obviously, like you wouldn't do a bicep curl in an armbar. You would do a different type of turning escape. If you're in mount, you're not going to bench press the person off of you. You're going to do a different kind of escape. But building pressing strength, one of the best exercises you can do for that is the bench press. So I don't think that the bench press amongst most grapplers is overrated or underrated. I'd say it's quite appropriately rated. However, there are some camps, and I'm not going to name any names, that like to hate on the bench press. And those guys that hate on the bench press, I've never seen them none of them are very jacked, and none of them are winning any Jiu Jitsu competitions. So take that with a grain of salt. Next exercise is landmine rotations. This is severely underrated. Pretty much all landmine exercises, I think, are underrated. There's probably some in there that maybe are coming up later in this list that I'll change my mind on. But I think the landmine is a fantastic tool for grapplers, mainly because any movement you do with the landmine is going to have some sort of rotational component to it. And it's important that as grapplers, we don't just train in the sagittal plane where we move forward and backwards and up and down. We also need to move in the transverse plane where we get some trunk rotation in there as well. And landmine rotations can be fantastic. I remember the first time I ever did landmine rotations, my abs, my obliques, all the tissues around my ribs were absolutely fried, and it felt amazing. So landmine rotations, underrated. I think that at least what I try to do as a coach, so whether I'm working with the athletes that I coach one-on-one or I'm plugging these exercises into the Strength Matrix training app, on lower body training sessions, I try to always have some form of rotation or some form of trunk rotation because I think it's important that we really strengthen our lower body. But a lot of the more traditional exercises that do that put a lot of spinal compression, which isn't always a bad thing, and it requires us to have a really rigid spine. So you think about doing a trap bar deadlift. You don't really want to be rotating that much in a trap bar deadlift, if at all. But we don't want to lose the ability to rotate. So a typical workout will be like, hey, you're going to do a trap bar deadlift. I'm actually working with a guy right now where I just updated his training program, and in his workout, he's doing trap bar deadlifts, and then he's also doing some rotational work in there as well. So landmine rotations, underrated. Bosu ball work. This is kind of a tough one because I'm not a Bosu ball hater. I think it has value. I think in the right context, it can be used, but I also think that it can be very dangerous. Not dangerous like it's going to cause a bunch of injuries, but just dangerous in the sense that like you can do a lot of quote unquote work or something that's challenging, but it's not really giving you that much of a benefit. I remember when I was training at the gym that I used to work at. This was like a commercial gym. Actually, no one couldn't call it a gym. You had to call it an athletic club. There was a guy there that would always do a bunch of Bosu ball stuff. And he was pretty jacked. He was an older cat. But I remember one of his favorite exercises, he would stand on a Bosu ball on one leg and do dumbbell curls. And I'm not trying to hate on him or anything, but if your goal is to improve proprioception, if your goal is to improve balance and coordination, that could be, it's arguable whether that's a good exercise to do. If your goal is to grow the biggest biceps possible and get the strongest squeeze you can in jiu-jitsu, that exercise sucks because the more balance you have to bring into a certain exercise or the more stability that you use or lose, the less force you could use in that exercise. So I've heard Dr. Mike Isertel talk about this. Imagine you were standing on a really shaky tightrope. It's really unstable. Now try to jump as high as you can. It's like, well, you're not going to be able to jump very high because you're not very stable. The more stable you are, the more force that you can put into a given exercise. And so if you're using the Bosu ball for strength work, you do run the risk of not being able to produce as much force because things are more unstable. That's not to say that you should never use the Bosu ball and it doesn't have a place in training. I believe it does. However, just keep that in mind. Like, hey, if you're trying to do the max effort method and you're doing Bosu ball one-legged dumbbell curls, yeah, that ain't gonna work. However, if you're doing some accessory work or maybe you're rehabbing an injury and you want to build some specific ankle strength, the Bosu ball can be fantastic. So Bosu ball is kind of like in this weird limbo area where some exercises I think are underrated or some uses of the Bosu ball are underrated, others severely overrated. Next up, barbell hip thrusts. I think those are overrated, to be honest. I think hip thrusts can be great for athletes that really struggle with deadlifts or different variations of deadlifts and maybe even some squats. But I think the hip thrust craze, I think has kind of blown it out of proportion a little bit. So not to say it's a bad exercise or invaluable exercise. I personally don't do a lot of hip thrusts. I get most of my hip extension and glute work and all the lunges, squatting, and deadlifting that I do. But I have gone through phases of training where I did hip thrusts, and it was cool, but I honestly just think it's a little overrated. Next up, sandbag carries. Sandbag carries, severely underrated. I think more grappling athletes need to get used to picking up some heavy ass sandbags. Just being able to pick up a heavy sandbag and carry it, whether you're doing short carries for like 15, 20 seconds with a super, super heavy sandbag, or you're doing more capacity work where you pick up a heavy sandbag and you carry it around for a minute to 2 minutes. I think both of those can be absolutely fantastic for grapplers. The main reason being a sandbag is it's very awkward to pick up. It's not going to be perfectly balanced like a barbell. It's not going to be have a perfectly set center of mass like a dumbbell or something like that. So you do kind of have to change how your body is stabilizing and moving through space to be able to act against kind of the changing weight of the sand sloshing around in that sandbag. The other thing too is that a lot of the ways that you pick up a sandbag take you out of this perfectly neutral spine. And so you get into some global flexion, or where you have some spinal flexion, which spinal flexion in your back rounding is not a bad thing, just as long as you build strength in those positions. It's kind of like how people used to say, like, oh my gosh, don't squat below parallel, it's bad for your knees. It's like, well, it's not bad for your knees. It's actually fantastic for your knees if you are not a dingus and you don't try to just like squat 1,000 pounds ass to grass the first time you step under a bar. That'd be ridiculous. So same thing with the sandbag. The sandbag can be great for strengthening your back to be strong in these rounded back positions, but just make sure like you're taking a nice gradual approach. Don't try to pick up a 300-pound sandbag the first time you ever walk up to one. Start with something that's like 20 pounds, 30 pounds, and then work your way up from there. Sandbag carries, underrated. Goblet squats, I'm a big fan of goblet squats. I think goblet squats are still underrated. I think goblet squats are really popular when people are kind of first getting into strength training, where they're not really loading up that much weight. So I would say like just a goblet squat in general might be a little overrated because most people don't do them heavy enough. But if you're intentional about really doing some heavy goblet squats, I think they're actually kind of underrated. And in one of the training courses in the Strength Matrix Foundations, we do a ton of heavy goblet squat work because it's fantastic for building up your upper back strength or upper back postural strength, as well as improving mobility and helping strengthen your lower body. Are you going to be able to squat the most amount of weight possible doing a goblet squat? No, but that's okay because you get these other benefits of being able to strengthen your upper back, being able to work on your mobility by having the weight in front of you where you can kind of change your balance a little bit to get into a deeper squat position. I think heavy-ass goblet squats are severely underrated, and that's why I made them a big part of the Foundations training course in the Strength Matrix training app. Next exercise, Turkish Getup. Overrated. I think the Turkish Getup is one of the worst exercises that has ever been labeled as a good exercise for grapplers. Just because an exercise looks like something that you do in your sport does not automatically mean that it is a valuable exercise for helping you get stronger for that sport. I know the Turkish Getup looks like a technical stand-up, but if you want to get better at technical stand-ups, just do technical stand-ups at Jiu Jitsu. And even how you do a technical stand-up at Jiu Jitsu looks nothing like a Turkish Getup. It always looks different. The Turkish Getup, when people say like, oh, the Turkish Getup is great at making you strong, it's not. Like, no one is getting brutally strong by doing Turkish Getups. They can create a lot of shoulder stability, that has value. They can get a good workout in the sense that that movement is challenging. It kind of challenges their balance a little bit, challenges their proprioception a little bit. Those things have value. But when it comes to building absolute strength, the Turkish Getup is not a great exercise. It's very unstable. And like I mentioned before, the more instability that you have in a given movement, the less force you're going to be able to produce, which means that the less of a training stimulus you're going to get for helping you get brutally strong as a grappler. And I've made videos about this before, and some people get really butthurt about it, and that's fine. I am the nastiest Turkish get-up hater because I'm tired of people saying that, oh, if you do Turkish get-ups, you're going to get brutally strong. Again, it can be good for shoulder stability, good for proprioception, coordination, stuff like that. But if you wanted to build up your lower body strength, the Turkish get-up is not going to do it for you. If you wanted to build up your pressing strength, Turkish get-up is not going to do it for you. If you wanted to build up your core strength, Turkish get-up, maybe. But I would say, like, pick up a heavy sandbag, do some heavy deadlifts, do something else where you can actually load up a lot more weight and make it much more structurally challenging than just holding a kettlebell over your head. So I'll get off my soapbox. Turkish get-up, overrated. Farmer's walks, on the other hand, I think those are still underrated. I know people know about them, and I know people, it's not like a brand new exercise. Farmer walks have been around forever, but I still think they're underrated because I don't see a lot of people in traditional gym environments going out of their way to do farmer walks. When I was training at that commercial gym many, many years ago, I can't call it the commercial gym, it was the athletic club. I never saw anyone doing, well, never say never, right? But I hardly ever saw anybody doing farmer walks. People would do tons of curls, tons of bench, lat pull downs, bicep machines, pec machines, all that stuff. But there were some heavy dumbbells. I think the heaviest dumbbells were, I think they went up to 120. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they went up to 120. And so, yeah, those aren't the heaviest dumbbells in the entire world. In the entire world, but for most people, 120-pound dumbbells are ridiculously heavy. So if you tried to just walk, 20 feet with 120-pound dumbbells, that's still pretty challenging for most people. And I didn't really see people going out of their way to do farmer walks. And so in that case, I'd say that farmer walks are underrated for building grappling strength. They're great for postural strength, trunk stability. People that can farmer walk a ton of weight they got giant traps, which is really cool. And so, yeah, I'd say they're underrated. Next is plate flips. I would say that this one's kind of overrated. I don't think that plate flips are going to make you brutally strong, and I think they're a really, really cool, like, circus exercise, so to speak, or like a challenge exercise, almost in the same way like a pistol squat. I think a pistol squat is great for mobility. A pistol squat is great for balance and stuff like that, but if you wanted to build the strongest legs possible, you probably wouldn't do a pistol squat. In the same way, I think if you wanted to build the strongest grip possible, a plate flip probably isn't going to be the best option. I think the plate flip can be like a fun thing that you tack on at the end of your workout, but I don't see how the plate flip would really drive up and help someone make massive strength gains in their grip and in their forearms compared to other things like heavy farmer walks. I think plate pinches are way more valuable than plate flips, different finger strength exercises and stuff like that. So plate flips, a little overrated, I'd say, but they are really fun to do. Next up is going to be thrusters. So a thruster, if you're not familiar, is a front squat right into an overhead press. Thrusters, at least I got first introduced to those when I was doing CrossFit. I hated them back then, and I still hate them now. I think the thruster is a cool exercise because it's really, really challenging. And if you have the mobility to do a thruster, if you have the technical capacity to do a thruster well, it can be a cool thing to kind of mix in as a full body lift. However, I think it is a little bit overrated because if you're doing a thruster with a straight bar, you have to clean the weight up to the front rack position. And for most grapplers, the front rack position can be very challenging. Not to mention doing barbell overhead presses from that front rack clean position can be tough if you want to do it seamlessly. It's not like where you do a military press where you can unrack the bar and you don't have to be in the front rack position. You just kind of have to be set up in the shoulder press position. Thrusters, if you're going to do them well, you kind of have to keep it in a front rack clean position as you do the front squat. And then right from that position, explode right into the press. And I think that it can just cause more issues than for what it's worth for grappling athletes. So I'd say the thruster is overrated. Next up is back extensions. I love back extensions. I'd say these are appropriately rated. It's not like I don't see people aggressively hating on back extensions, and I don't see people like glorifying back extensions or anything like that. So I'd say that's appropriately rated. Next up would be the Nordic hamstring curl. I think, let's see, I don't remember when knees over toes guy got really popular and started popping off, but before knees over toes guy, I'd say that the Nordic curl was severely underrated. Post knees over toes guy, I think the Nordic curl is a little overrated, to be honest. I think it's still important. I think every grappling athlete, regardless of how big you are, what weight class, what belt level, whether you're a pro, hobbyist, whatever, every grappling athlete should work towards the goal of being able to complete one full range of motion unassisted Nordic curl, because building that kind of strength in your hamstrings and behind your knees can have huge benefits for your grappling game. So it is a very, very valuable exercise, but I do think it's a little overrated, just a little bit. Next up is battle ropes. Battle ropes, that's a terrible exercise for strength. It's great for conditioning. It's great for local muscular endurance, but again, you're not going to be able to load that up very heavy, and because of that, you're not going to get much of a strength stimulus. So battle ropes, I think, can be fantastic for, to put in a conditioning circuit, to put in a warm-up, to put in some GPP work. But for strength work, if we're just talking about strength, battle ropes, overrated. Sled pushes and sled pulls, I think, are always going to be underrated. I don't really see a point in the future where people are going to overhype the value of a sled. Heavy sled pushes, heavy sled drags are fantastic. It's a concentric only movement, which means that you have no eccentric loading, and you're not really like lowering or lengthening the muscles under load. So when you do a bicep curl, you have the concentric, which is where you curl the weight up, but then when you slowly lower the weight down, you have that eccentric contraction or that lengthening under load on the bicep. That lengthening under load tends to cause more muscle damage than the concentric. And so if you have exercises that you can do really, really heavy that are concentric only, like the sled drag, like the sled push, you can get some really good strength gains without necessarily creating the same kind of muscle damage and having that much of a need to recover a lot after doing that. So if you do a lot of heavy sled drags, you can recover very, very, very fast compared to if you did a bunch of heavy back squats or deadlifts. So I think sled pushes and sled pulls of any style, I think, are always going to be underrated, and I don't think grapplers can do enough sled drags. I try to have sled drags for most of my athletes if they have access to one. I try to do sled drags when I have access to one. Sled drags are fantastic. Next up, Bulgarian bag drills. I think the Bulgarian bag, it's hard for me to comment on this because I've never used one, but the way I see people using it is they use it a lot for conditioning, like they do like circuits with the Bulgarian bag. And if you're doing a circuit with the Bulgarian bag, that's great for conditioning, not that great for strength. So the Bulgarian bag, in that context, is probably overrated for grappling strength. But, a sandbag, if you're like me, you weigh 175 pounds or so, and you pick up a 175 pound sandbag, that can be great for strength because you're picking up your own body weight. So if they make Bulgarian bags that are big enough to be the weight of your own body weight or even a little bit more, I think those can be great for strength. I just haven't seen them on the market yet. Next is going to be the wall sit. Wall sit doesn't really do much as far as like a ton of force output. It's the wall sit. It's an isometric contraction, which has value. I just did an episode on isometrics. I think that was 2 weeks ago. However, the way you load up a wall sit, like unless you're super, super weak, you quickly kind of move out of the strength range and just go into the muscular endurance range. So if you can do a wall sit for over a minute, you're not really doing much strength work anymore. You're just going into muscular endurance. So I think wall sits can be good for muscular endurance. They're kind of difficult to make like extra heavy. You can put plates on your knees, but that's not really loading the muscles in the same way. It's just pushing your knees into your shins and then your shins and your ankles into the floor. So I'd say the wall sit is probably overrated for strength. And I don't know if even for muscular endurance, it's not fantastic, you know? So I'll say it's overrated. Next up is the wrist roller. When I was in middle school in PE, we would do those wrist rollers. We'd do those things, they'd call them SSTs. I think they were called standard, like something like scholastic standard testing or something standard testing. Anyway, it was like basically CrossFit for PE, at least in the middle school and the high school. Actually, I don't think we did SSTs in high school. I think we only did them in middle school. Anyway, we did wrist rollers, and then of course, if you're a wrestler, every wrestler knows what the wrist roller is like. I think the wrist roller is really, really good when it's used properly. So I'd say proper use of the wrist roller is underrated. Traditional use of the wrist roller, where you're just holding it up with your shoulders and rolling it that way, in that context, it just becomes a matter of how strong your shoulders are. I think the best way to use a wrist roller is to actually place your arms on something, to have something support your arms, or use like a barbell where you're rolling something up with a barbell where your shoulders aren't going to be the limiting factor. I think that is severely underrated for building awesome wrist flexion strength and wrist extension strength when it's used properly. Next is going to be the Russian twist with weights. Yeah, I guess I'd say that's appropriately rated. You know, like it's always good to build rotational strength. It's always good to build capacity to turn at your hips and with your trunk. I think when most people do Russian twists, they do them kind of as part of a circuit. So you're kind of just leaning more towards local muscular endurance. But if you like locked your feet into place and, you know, gradually over time, you were actually able to do some pretty heavy Russian twists with control for sets of like 6 to 8 reps, that can actually, I would imagine, build a pretty strong trunk. So I'd say Russian twists, maybe in that case, Russian twists are a little underrated. Next up is going to be a plank. Planks, I think, are overrated for strength. Unless you're super, super weak, which most grapplers, just by nature of all the movements that they're doing and how much they're curling their knees to their elbows and stuff, their abs are already just getting kind of strong from doing Jiu Jitsu. A plank isn't going to make you that much stronger for Jiu Jitsu. I think there are better isometric ab exercises that are going to challenge you a lot more, so that way you can actually get a really good strength stimulus. I don't see how the plank is that great of a strength exercise. I think it's overrated. Medicine ball slams, overrated for strength, very, very underrated for speed and explosive power. Box jumps, same thing. They're really explosive, which means that just by the nature of them being fast and explosive, they're not heavy enough to produce a lot of strength gains, but they are fantastic for building explosive power. Next up, we got the kettlebell deadlift. If you have access to some heavy-ass kettlebells, the kettlebell deadlift, I think, is actually really underrated. Because what's cool about the kettlebell deadlift is that you can change kind of how you're picking it up compared to just a regular barbell. So you can do it sumo style, where the weight sits underneath you. You can do it where you have a kettlebell on each side, so it's kind of like a trap bar deadlift. You can also do straddle stance deadlifts, where you have one leg in front, one leg behind, and then you have a kettlebell in each hand, or maybe you just you have a straddle stance and you pick up one heavy kettlebell underneath you. So kettlebell deadlifts, I'd say, are underrated in the sense that you can really change up the different positions you're getting into to pick the weight up off the floor, and I think those are great. Jefferson curls, Jefferson curls are kind of tough because they did get really popular for a minute, and then I first heard about Jefferson curls, I think in 2015, 2016, and they were really hot then. And then I didn't really hear about them much at all until a couple of years ago. So I think they're kind of having a little bit of a resurgence right now in popularity. And I would say that Jefferson curls are, at least right now, are kind of still underrated. I think, it's, you don't want to mess yourself up with the Jefferson curl by going into it with too much too much haste. You want to be careful with it. And I think a lot of people mess themselves up with the Jefferson curl, mainly because they load it up with too much weight too fast. And I think that can be a bit of a problem. So I would say if you are going to do Jefferson curls, do them really, really slow. Jefferson curls are great for strengthening your spinal flexion ability. So being strong with a fully rounded back position. And they're great for mobility, but just be careful with them. You want to make sure that you're using a weight that is manageable. For me, I usually, anytime I'm doing heavy Jefferson curls, I usually don't do less than 5 reps. And that's like a little barometer for me of like, I don't really want to test my 1 rep max Jefferson curl right now. Maybe in the future, I'll work up to that, but I don't really do them enough to feel comfortable doing a 1 rep max on a Jefferson curl. And when I structure them for my own athletes training, I usually just have them do it as part of their accessory work. So anytime I'm laying out a lower body workout, so like a max effort lower body workout for the athletes that I'm coaching one-on-one, I have them do their max effort main movement, and it's usually some form of squat or hip hinge. And just by nature of it being max effort and really heavy, they're getting into these very rigid positions, or they're creating a lot of spinal stability. And then some of the exercises we do afterwards, specifically kind of targeting the back and the spine, are going to get them out of that super stiff spinal rigid spine position. So if we do a Zercher box squat where the spine is very rigid, some other exercise in the workout may feature some rotation or some global flexion where you're kind of rounding your back at every single vertebrae, or global extension where you're trying to arch your back as much as possible. So I really try to make sure that in every lower body workout, we're kind of moving the spine in all the ways it's designed to move, and Jefferson curls kind of fit within that process. Next up is going to be push-ups. Push-ups are, I think, underrated. I don't think people do push-ups enough, and I don't think people do them in a way that's challenging enough. I think full range of motion push-ups are one of the best exercises that grapplers can be doing, because if you're able to work through that full range of motion, you not only get a great stretch at the bottom in your pecs, but you also get great improvements in shoulder mobility. And body weight push-ups, up to a certain point get pretty easy. And so if you want to use push-ups as a strength exercise, just add weight. Put on a weight vest. I did some yielding isometrics where you pause at the bottom. I did those with push-ups, and so I worked through a full range of motion. I just stacked these plates so that way I can get all the way down into a full range of motion, feel that stretch at the bottom, and then I was doing sets of 6. And I can do, if it was just my body weight, I can definitely do a lot more than 6 pull-ups. So to add weight to make it challenging, I just draped chains over my neck. And what was really cool about that is that at the bottom, a lot of the chain was on the floor where I'm in my weakest position or the hardest position. But then as I started to press up, I picked more and more links of that chain off the ground, which made it tougher and tougher to lock out. So it was a great exercise, felt freaking awesome. I think push-ups are underrated. Someone sent this in, and I think I understand what this is. I could be wrong, but they said isometric shrug with a band. And I've never done that before. I've never even seen it before. So I've never seen someone do shrugs with a barbell where they put bands over the bar. Or maybe they're just talking about doing shrugs where they stand on a band and lift up. And because the shrug motion is so short, I don't really see much of a difference between using a band versus just using straight weight, in my opinion. I think the biggest benefit that bands provide is that they help you overload the strength curve. And the strength curve is kind of the rate of difficulty that the change in position presents. So if you think about the barbell bench press, it's really easy to hold a bunch of weight up at the top of the movement. It's a lot harder when you try to press the weight up off your chest. So the strength curve, or the change in difficulty, is it's easier at the top, it's a lot harder at the bottom, and as you press up and get closer to lockout, it gets a little bit easier. That's not to say that, if you got really weak triceps, it might still be difficult at lockout, but you guys get what I'm saying. What adding bands allow you to do, and chains. These are forms of accommodating resistance, which means that if we're doing a bench press, if I have bands or chains on the bar, at the top, I have a lot more force and weight coming down on top of me. But as I lower the bar into the hardest position, which is on my chest, I start to deload some of the chain weight onto the floor, or I start to decrease the band tension. And so this works for bench press, this works for squats, this works for deadlifts, this works for lunges. It works best with exercises that have a large strength curve, but shrugs, the range of motion is super short and the strength curve it's very small compared to some of those exercises. So I think going through the trouble of, if you're already doing shrugs with dumbbells, you're already doing shrugs with a barbell, I don't really see much need to put band tension on there unless you're at home and you don't have access to any free weights and you just have a band and that's all you got. Well, then yeah, I guess that's how you're going to do your shrugs, and in that case I'd say that's fine. So I'd say ISO shrugs with bands are probably a little overrated, mainly because I don't really see that much value in them when compared to just doing a regular shrug with a barbell or dumbbells. Hey, real quick, I wanted to pause the podcast and tell you about the Strength Matrix training app and our free training program called Grappler Accelerator. This is a complete training program that covers all of your needs to help you get started on becoming the best grappling athlete that you can be. Everything from a full strength and conditioning training program, a simple and clean diet guide, recovery protocols, a super sleep toolkit, and a bunch of other dope stuff to help you lift heavy and roll hard. There's already over 1,000 grapplers that have downloaded this training program and gotten started on enhancing their grappling athleticism, and you can be the next. To download this training program today, just go to thestrengthmatrix.com/grappler or click the link in the description below. Now, back to the podcast. Next up is going to be weighted dips. So I don't think we talked about weighted calisthenics yet, but weighted dips, weighted pull-ups, weighted chin-ups, I'll kind of just talk about all those right now. I think those are a little bit overrated, mainly because I think people jump to those types of exercises a little too soon. As a coach, I've been a strength and conditioning coach for over 8 years now. I started coaching wrestlers, which wrestlers have some amazing strength to body weight ratio. And then once I moved out of wrestling and I started coaching more Jiu Jitsu athletes, nowadays I pretty much only work with grapplers. And from what I've seen is that I don't think adding a weight to pull-ups is that beneficial unless someone can, at least men, can already do 20 strict body weight pull-ups, or they can already do about 20 or so strict body weight dips. Mainly because I think that if someone can only do 10 pull-ups, like the max number of pull-ups they can do is 10, and they're like, okay, I want to get strong, I'm going to add weight. It's like, the max number you can do is 10. Why don't you do 3 sets of 5 and you get a total of 15? And then if that becomes too easy, do 3 sets of 8. And then if that gets too easy, do 3 sets of 10. And just keep kind of building up from there. So, but if someone can do 20 pull-ups or more, then the question is like, okay, are we working on muscular endurance or are we working on strength? It's like, okay, to get to that point where we're getting close to failure, to challenge the pull-up motion, we'd be having to do like at least 15, 16, 17 reps every single set just to make it challenging enough to get close to failure. And plus we're getting outside of those typical strength ranges. So for most athletes that I've worked with over the last 8 years, I tell them, look, we're just doing body weight pull-ups. If you want to test your pull-ups and you can bust down on 20 pull-ups strict, great. Let's load it up. Let's start doing some heavy pull-ups for sets of 5, sets of 6. If you can't get 20 pull-ups yet, just do all the forms of bodyweight pull-ups that you can do and make it challenging. So maybe someone can do 15 pull-ups and we want to get a good strength stimulus. Well, we can add tempo. We can add isometric pauses. We can do different types of rep schemes where we do pyramid sets or we do rest pause sets with pull-ups. There's so many different ways that we can challenge or make isometric exercise or isometrics, make calisthenic exercises more challenging before we just add weight. So weighted dips I think are fantastic. If someone can do more than 20 strict body weight dips, I think for, in one of the episodes I talked about with strength standards, the standards I have for my athletes are, minimum 10 pull-ups, minimum 10 dips. A good base standard would be 15 pull-ups, 20 dips. I think even for the athletes that I coach, I usually encourage them like, hey, if you're going to do weighted dips, like try to get up to 30 reps first. But some of you might be listening to this and asking like, hey, if I can already do 20 dips, can I just add a weight? And I'd say like, just make that decision on your own. But minimum standard for pull-ups and dips is 10 reps. Base standard, 15 pull-ups, 20 dips. Elite standard, 20 pull-ups, 30 dips. If you're going much farther beyond that, like say you're trying to chase 25 pull-ups or 35 dips, I don't really see how that in particular is going to create that much extra strength gains for you when, if you're already doing 20 pull-ups, if you're already doing 20 to 30 dips, probably safe to add some extra load, do heavier sets of 5 to 6, and continue driving up that strength. All right, enough on weighted calisthenics. Next up is going to be RDLs, or Romanian deadlifts. This is a classic exercise, like classic in powerlifting, classic in bodybuilding, classic in Olympic weightlifting. And I think what's awesome about this is that this is really a great loaded stretch on the hamstring. You can build really strong, robust hamstrings. There's a couple different ways that you can train your hamstrings. You can train your hamstrings by doing these loaded stretches and training hip extension movements like good mornings or Romanian deadlifts. And you can also train your hamstrings with knee flexion or like doing a leg curl motion. And I think it's important that when we're training the hamstrings, we have both. You don't just want to be a leg curl junkie. You don't just want to be an RDL hip hinge junkie. You want to make sure that you're training your hamstrings in both forms. So in that case, I'd say RDLs are appropriately rated at this point, and they're a fantastic exercise. What can I say? All right, next up is going to be dead hangs, or just hanging from a pull-up bar. I think this is actually kind of underrated. There was a phase of training that I went through where in my warm-ups for like a month straight, I tried to do one-arm hangs, and dude, my freaking grip got so strong just mixing in one-arm hangs. Doing a two-arm hang isn't that challenging unless you're like, you have like a dip belt and you add some extra weight, or you're going for time. It's not that challenging. I'm a smaller guy, so it's for a smaller guy to hold up his body weight, it's a lot easier than a bigger guy. But one thing that I did to make it more challenging was I did one-arm hangs, and that was actually pretty tough. And my grip got really strong. I also felt like my shoulders got really strong. And if you do a two-arm hang and you kind of let your lower body relax a little bit, you get a little bit of some spinal traction or decompression on the discs in your spine, which could feel pretty good. So yeah, I'd say pull-up hangs. I'd say they're underrated. I don't see people doing them enough, so I'd say in that case they are underrated. Next up is going to be chin-up isometric holds. I'd say those are appropriately rated. I did a whole episode on isometrics a couple weeks ago where we talked about the different types of isometrics, and one type of isometric is a yielding isometric where you're holding a static position against resistance. And in this case, you're holding the static position at the top of that chin-up. And it can be great for building strength, helping stimulate a little bit more muscle growth by creating a little bit more time under tension. But at a certain point, if you're holding for longer than about 10 seconds, you're kind of just moving into the territory of muscular endurance, which is great. But if you're doing like 15, 20-second chin-up holds, you're not stimulating that much muscle growth and you're not stimulating that much strength. So if you want to get the most out of this where you're getting strength out of your chin-up isometrics, either do like multiple reps, like sets of 5, sets of 6 with a pause at the top, or if you can already bust down on 20 strict chin-ups with no pause, then add a little bit of weight and try to hold your chin over the bar with a 10-pound plate or a 15, 10 and a 5, 15 total pounds of additional weight, and go from there. So chin-up holds, I'd say, I don't even know what most people think about this, so I'd say it's a little bit underrated. Zercher deadlift, fantastic exercise. I honestly think it's a little overrated. I think people are kind of looking into the Zercher deadlift a little bit too much and overhyping it a little bit. That's not to say it's a bad exercise. It's a great exercise. I love Zercher deadlifts. Again, like the Jefferson curl, like sandbag deadlifts or sandbag lifts, you're training your ability to be strong in that rounded back position, which is fantastic for grapplers. I just think that people are gassing it up a little bit too much. So Zercher deadlifts, a little overrated, but still a great exercise, one of my all-time favorites. Next up, we've got bent over rows. Bent over rows are a classic bodybuilding and powerlifting exercise, and I can see where people have like debate on whether or not the bent over row is a good strength exercise. Because some people look at the bent over row and say, you know, your bent over row is limited by your lower back. If your lower back gives out before your upper back does, then you're not able to use enough weight to stimulate growth and strength gains in your upper back, which that makes sense. But then on the other end of the spectrum, I also see how you could use bent over rows and kind of do like cheat reps and heave the weight a little bit and get a little bit of lower back strength built up in there too, and like kind of get used to throwing around some really, really heavy weights. So if you're doing the bent over row correctly, and you're doing an actual row, you're not doing like a power shrug, which is what I see a lot of people do when the bent over row gets a little too heavy. If you're doing a real bent over row, I think bent over rows are still underrated as a great grappling strength exercise, but a lot of people do start to let their ego take over a little bit, where they're in the really good bent over position to start. As they start adding more and more weight, they start standing more and more upright, and then it turns into a power shrug where you're not really building that much back pulling strength. You're just kind of building up your traps. So there's that on bent over rows. Conventional deadlift, I think, is a little overrated for grapplers. I've never been a huge fan of the conventional deadlift. It's just a hard exercise for me. I don't think everyone is built to do the conventional deadlift really, really well. And I think for some athletes, that it's kind of like a golden exercise for them. Their proportions are right. They feel great when they do it. And for other athletes, it starts to give them more issues than for what it's worth. So conventional deadlift can be a great strength exercise, but I think for a lot of athletes, it can be overrated. And for me, I don't think I've done a conventional deadlift in probably a year and a half. And I'm still a strong grappler. I'm still continuing to get stronger, but my conventional deadlift numbers haven't gone up in a long time. And I'm just not a big fan of that exercise. So I'd say it's a little overrated. Sumo deadlift, I think, is a little, it's not overrated, but I don't think it's underrated. I'd say it's appropriately rated. What I like about the sumo deadlift is that you are getting your feet outside of your hips, and it's a great way to strengthen a lot of the muscles on the insides of your legs. So when you think about all sports outside of powerlifting, especially Jiu Jitsu, you're hardly ever in a position where your feet are close together. You're oftentimes in this position where your feet are outside your hips or in a staggered stance or in a wide stance position. And so training to your body to get strong in those positions is a good idea. And the sumo deadlift can be part of that. So in that context, it can be a very valuable exercise for building strength in your hips, in your adductors, in your groin, in your hamstrings, glutes, all that stuff. However, some people get so good at sumo deadlifting with their form and technique where they're wedging the bar off the ground, and they got these like crazy deadlift bars with tons of whip in them. If that's what you're doing, I think there is a limit on how much value the sumo deadlift is going to give you as a grappler, but I think it is still a great exercise. Whether it's overrated or underrated, I'm just going to say it's appropriately rated. So next exercise, this was really cool to see. Someone submitted this, and this is really cool to see because I haven't done these in forever, and I honestly forgot about them. But legless rope climbs. If you're a wrestler, pretty much in every wrestling room, well, I don't know about every wrestling room, but in most wrestling rooms, there's a rope, and you do so many rope climbs, and sometimes you use your feet, sometimes you can do it legless. Legless rope climbs are really, really tough, man. And especially as you get older and bigger, they get tougher and tougher. So if you can continue to build up strength to do legless rope climbs, I think that's a severely underrated exercise. And even doing regular rope climbs with your legs involved, I think is also severely underrated and can be great for building up grip strength, building up pulling strength, the strength of your hands, the strength of your shoulders. I think a lot of times when people think about grip strength, Dan Strauss, he talked about this once. He talked about the different kinds of pulling strength or different kinds of grip strength. Sorry. And one of the things he talked about was you have like crushing strength, you got pinching strength and all that stuff. But he also said you have vertical grip strength where your wrist is in this vertical position. So think about climbing a rope, or if you reach out and grab someone's wrist at Jiu Jitsu, you're in a little bit of a different position or a different wrist position compared to your grip strength when you just grab a dumbbell or you just grab a barbell. I thought that was pretty cool. And so I think legless rope climbs are great, mainly because you're getting your wrist outside of the traditional lifting positions. And oftentimes the ropes are pretty thick, so you're kind of using like a fat grip or like a C clamp grip to hang onto that rope. And it's in that vertical wrist position for you to climb up. So legless rope climbs, solid, underrated. Dumbbell bench press for grapplers. A full range of motion dumbbell bench press done properly, still severely underrated. You get a big stretch at that bottom position, deep, deep, deep shoulder flexion, I think, or shoulder extension. You get a huge stretch in the, you get a huge stretch in the pec and really get to build strength in those tissues at the bottom position. And I think if you get in the habit of every single time you do dumbbell bench press, if you get in the habit of working through a full range of motion, like be strict with it, even as the size of the dumbbell gets bigger and it becomes a little bit easier to cut that range of motion short, turn your hands neutral and get that big stretch at the bottom position. I think that's going to be great for building up strength and resiliency in the tissues of the pecs and shoulders, which do tend to get messed up a lot at Jiu Jitsu. So I think full range of motion dumbbell bench press, underrated. Next up, dumbbell overhead press. I'd say that's appropriately rated. I don't really see a lot of people gassing it up too much or hating on it too much. I'd throw a military press in there too, appropriately rated, same thing. Barbell hip thrust, I think we talked about that one already, and I'd say it's kind of overrated. Zercher split squat. I love the Zercher split squat. I do them all the freaking time, and it's a really fun exercise. And I don't know if it's overrated or underrated per se. I think split squats in general are underrated. I don't think you always have to use a barbell in the Zercher position. You can do dumbbell split squats. You can do belt split squats. So if you have a belt squat, doing split squats on that machine, I think is underrated. Any sort of split squat, I'd say, is underrated. And one of the ways that you can do it and load up a lot of heavy-ass weight is the Zercher split squat, which I'm a big fan of. Hill sprints. Hill sprints are not a great strength exercise. They're great for explosive power, great for conditioning, not great for strength. And that's just mainly because you're moving so fast and explosive that you're really just getting a great training stimulus to produce power, to be explosive, to be fast. So fantastic exercise, overrated for strength. Single arm kettlebell curls. I've done those before. They're challenging. It definitely gives a different kind of stimulus to how you would train your arms and your biceps. But I do think they're a little overrated because if your goal is to achieve maximum growth, you want to put as much tension as possible and lift as much as you can in those, traditional hypertrophy rep ranges. And if the kettlebell makes it too unstable, then you're not going to be able to get as much out of the exercise. So in that case, I would say it's a little overrated. Front squats. I think front squats are underrated. I was just thinking about this the other day. I was thinking man, I kind of miss doing front squats. I haven't done front squats in a while. I've been doing a lot of Zercher squats, a lot of belt squats. That's kind of only the squats I've been doing for the last 6 months or so. But I was reminded of this is probably 2 years ago or 3 years ago, I did a phase of training where we would do max effort front squats. We got the old AM crew that I was running with back in the day, we would do some crazy stuff. We'd work up to a 5 rep max on front squats, we'd take off 20% and then we'd do an AMRAP. And that was nuts. That was like a real challenging phase of training that we were in. But front squats are really, really fun. And I think what's great about front squats is that because the bar is loaded in front of your body, you are going to get a lot of upper back postural strength benefits in there as well. Because it's in front of your body, it could be a little bit easier to get down into that ass to grass position. And if you can't, that's a sign that you need to work on your mobility. And they're fairly safe in the sense that if you need to bail, you just dump the bar forward. So I really like front squats. The only downside is that doing a traditional front squat in the front rack position can be really tough for athletes that got giant python biceps, present company included. Just kidding. And it can just be tough for people that have shoulder injuries, elbow injuries, and wrist issues. So I mean, I would like to say that my arms have grown after going through this hypertrophy phase, but that's not the main reason why I struggle with the front rack position. I think it's because like my elbow mobility and my shoulder mobility needs to improve quite a bit. So if you can do front squats, fantastic. If you can't get into that front rack position, I'm a big fan of Zercher squats, which are a front-loaded squat. And I'm also a big fan of zombie squats. Zombie squats are where you are holding your arms out in front and you rest the bar on your clavicle or on your collarbone. You're just not sticking your hands and wrists under the bar. So it takes a little bit more balance, but it's kind of a good litmus test to keep you honest, because if you start to round your upper back and lean forward, the bar just falls off your shoulders and your chest. So front squats and zombie squats, I would say, are underrated. Last couple exercises. Snatches, overrated. I don't think grapplers really need to be doing snatches from the floor. I think Olympic lifting in general for sports performance, I honestly think is a little overrated. It's been around for decades, and it can definitely help you become powerful, fast, really explosive. But I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze with the Olympic lifts, particularly snatches for grapplers. Grapplers already got so many shoulder injuries, so many elbow injuries, and having them do heavy snatches as a strength exercise, I think there's better things that can be done that aren't going to have as much wear and tear on their body. And the other thing is that it takes a while to learn how to do snatches well. And so if a grappler has an 8-week training camp, they're gearing up for ADCC trials, they're gearing up for, IBJJF Worlds, they're gearing up for CJI. If I have 8 weeks to work with an athlete for a competition, I'm not going to teach them how to snatch, because within those 8 weeks, they're probably not going to get the form and technique down fast enough and be technically proficient enough to where they can really start throwing some heavy weights. I'd much rather teach them something that's a little bit easier to get the hang of, like a landmine snatch or a kettlebell snatch, so that way we can get similar benefits without much of a learning curve. Next up and last exercise, overrated, underrated, is going to be the L-sit chin-up. I think L-sits in general can be a great isometric exercise for the hip flexors and lower abs. L-sit chin-ups are pretty cool, but usually I see most people failing those because their abs give out before their upper back and their arms give out. So if you're doing L-sit chin-ups specifically to strengthen your abs, I'd say that's fine. If you're doing L-sit chin-ups to improve your pulling strength, just do regular chin-ups. In that case, I would consider L-sit chin-ups to be a little overrated. And that's the list. That is the overrated, underrated list of today's episode. We got a couple comments and a couple members from the Lift Heavy Roll Hard Grappling Club that were chirping at us, which is always awesome when you guys engage and leave comments either on YouTube, Spotify, or on Instagram. But before we dive into that, I did want to let you know that this episode and every other episode is brought to you by the Strength Matrix Training app, which is the ultimate hub to help you develop elite grappling athleticism and ultimately teach you how to take back control of your training. So if you want to get brutally strong, you want to pack on slabs of muscle, and you want to build a gas tank that never gasses out, check out thestrengthmatrix.com. We got free training courses that you can download. We also got premium training courses that you can check out that are going to teach you everything you need to know about developing elite grappling athleticism. Thestrengthmatrix.com, check it out. All right, let's go over what you guys were saying from the Lift Heavy Roll Hard community. I So one guy left a comment, Jeff, at JeffDBMB, and on the conditioning episode that we dropped last week, Jeff said, I don't think zone 2 is 85%. I think it's more like 60 to 70%. And I made a mistake. So in last week's episode, when I was talking about zone 2 cardio, I mentioned how zone 2 cardio typically takes place around 85% of your maximum heart rate. I was wrong. What I should have said was takes place closer to 65% of your maximum heart rate. Jeff was kind enough to point that out and keep me on game. And so just wanted to make that known. I made the mistake. Jeff is correct. And then I confirmed that with a bunch of other sources as well as I continued to do my research and stuff and double check. But zone 2 conditioning, around 60 to 70% of your maximum heart rate is around zone 2. So thank you, Jeff, for that. Next comment we got was from EndMidi6659. He was saying, dropping great knowledge, and I'm only 6 minutes into the podcast. My man, you know how we do. I try to make sure that we just dive into the solid information and content right away. One thing that always bugs me is when people record podcasts and they ramble on for like 10 minutes about something that is not even pertinent to the conversation, and then the conversation starts like, look, dog, I'm trying to get the value now. I'm trying to get some free game now. So get to it. So EndMidi6659, I'm glad that you're getting tons of value, even only 6 minutes into the podcast. That's my goal. My goal really is to help you guys take back control of your training. That's why I do this podcast. That's why I created the Strength Matrix training app. I really want to help you guys not just train better so you can get better results, but help educate you guys on the why behind and the how on all this stuff works, so that way you guys can start implementing this stuff into your own training. The whole reason why I called my company and training app the Strength Matrix is because I really believe training is like the Matrix in the movie. You know, like at the end of the movie, Neo, he doesn't see the agents anymore. He just sees all the lines of code and he starts tweaking with the Matrix and he can start flying and stopping bullets and all this stuff. And that's what I want you guys to be able to do with your own training. In the Strength Matrix training app, this podcast is my method of helping you guys get there. So, EndMidi, thanks for leaving that comment, man. I'm glad you're enjoying the show. All right, this next comment is super funny, and I just had to put it in today's episode. This guy's name is Johnny G-String. That is like, that's got to be like the funniest name I've ever seen in a comment. Johnny G-String. It's like a movie character name. His comment was on the supplement episode where I listed the 26 different supplements and compounds that I'm currently taking to enhance my performance in the gym and on the mat. And he said, this is madness. You're a blue belt, ? And you're banging shit into your body with a needle for what? I'm a hobbyist and 55 years old. I lift 5 days a week and I've done forever. I do at least 5 hours of BJJ a week. You do not need this crap. Eat well, rest well, and listen to your body. Take it from an old head who has avoided all PEDs and fads. So Johnny G-String was a little heated based on that podcast. And I think he brings up a good point, like, you know, eat well, rest well, listen to your body. That stuff is definitely important. And if you're not doing that, you're not setting yourself up for success. However, I think sometimes when people hear that certain supplements involve needles or certain supplements involve intramuscular administration, if you want to call it that, they automatically assume that it's bad. And I don't think that's necessarily fair, or I think that's just a limited mindset. So Johnny G-String, I have no idea if you're going to make it this far into the episode, but I hope you know that all the stuff that I laid out in that episode is perfectly legal. It's perfectly, none of that stuff is like severely detrimental to my health or the athletes that I coached where they also use some of the stuff that I listed out. And I care a lot about feeling and performing my best, and I don't want to be average. I don't want to be physically average. Like I want to push the limit, and you know, I consider myself to still be a natural athlete because I'm not taking any like hormonal enhancements or anything like that. But even the whole idea about like natural versus non-natural, I think is kind of ridiculous. But for lack of a better term, I would say I'm still considered a natural athlete. And as a natural athlete, I want to take every advantage I can and helping my body perform better and be optimized in all areas of my performance and health. And so just because there is a needle involved, or just because there's intramuscular administration, that doesn't mean that it's going to be an automatic detriment to my health or an automatic, like cheat or anything like that. I think that's kind of ridiculous. But Johnny G String, you do bring up a good point, my man. Even as a 55-year-old, you got some game you can impart on these young cats listening to the podcast. Eat well, rest well, and listen to your body. I think that's fantastic advice. So last one that I wanted to shout out was my guy Tommaso Cusini. He says, "Hi, I want to start by saying that I really think this channel is elite, so underrated." Bro, Settlage Strength Podcast, overrated, underrated? We got it from Tommaso. He said it here, that it's underrated. I have a question. I have always heard that it's best to do the explosive exercises first when you are fresh and the nervous system is fresh also. But in the condensed conjugate workouts, the max effort exercises are first and the dynamic effort exercises are after. Am I missing something? I've been following you for a long time and have always asked myself this question. Thank you for all this amazing content. So this is a really, really good and insightful question. So Tommaso, you're right. Most research suggests that if you wanted to optimize your explosive power work, you would do that at the beginning of your workout because that's when your nervous system is fresh. That's when you're most twitchy. That's when you're most reactive. And then because your strength isn't going to take as much of a hit, you can move into your traditional strength or heavier work next. And I do agree with that. I do believe that that is the case. However, dynamic effort work is really, really hard and it's really, really taxing. Or if you're doing it right, it's really, really taxing. So there is like this balance to be had of like, okay, if both things are going to be tough and challenging, what can we do to try to find like the optimal way to putting both of those things into the workout and into the training session? The thing with the dynamic effort method, the way that I look at it is like the main goal of that is to be fast and explosive. The main goal of the max effort method is to strain against some heavy loads, lift something heavy, and then move on. So when it comes to those two things, because grappling is not the most explosive sport in the entire world, I have found that athletes get a little bit better results, specifically in the context of grappling athleticism, when we leverage a little bit more on bringing the time that we're freshest, the time that we have the most focus, the most intensity, putting that into our max effort work. And then afterwards, we move into our dynamic effort work. I also think that there's I also think that there's a benefit to doing dynamic effort work when you're in a little bit of a fatigued state, because that's going to be a little bit more specific to the kind of conditions that you're going to be in when you're rolling hard. It's not like this is like you're a sprinter where you sprint and then you rest for an hour and then you sprint in the next heat. With Jiu Jitsu, you need to be able to be brutally strong. You also got to have good conditioning, and then there are going to be moments where you need to be really, really explosive. And so creating a little bit of a scenario in your workout where you do your explosive work in a slightly fatigued state after your max effort work, I think does have some benefits for grapplers. The only time that I would change this is if an athlete has a greater weakness in explosive power than they do in max effort strength or absolute strength. And so for simplicity's sake, I usually just say like, hey, if you're doing condensed conjugate and you're doing max effort and dynamic effort in the same day, then you're a grappler, do max effort first, then do dynamic effort. But when we look at an athlete's individual needs, an athlete may come from a background where they're already really, really strong. Like they're a power lifter, they're really big, they can, deadlift 500, 600 pounds, they can bench over 300 pounds, they can squat 400, 500 pounds. They're pretty strong by most grapplers' terms. That guy has already got absolute strength out the wazoo. He's good. What we should work on with him and emphasize a little bit more is the explosive power work. So in that context, we would put the explosive power work at the start of the workout. If someone is already really conditioned, someone is already really fast, but they're not very strong, but then we'll just put the max effort work at the beginning of the workout. So that's not to say that there is a right and wrong in my mind. I don't think that there's a right and wrong with whether or not you should do max effort or dynamic effort work first. I think you should put whatever your biggest weakness is at the start of your workout. Once you do that, go into the thing that you're weakest at with the most amount of intent, the most amount of intensity when you feel fresh, and then, use the rest of the energy that you have left over for the stuff that you're not as weak in or that you're already good at, so to speak. If you wanted to drive up the benefit of your explosive power work even more, you can shift to a 3-day condensed conjugate split where you go day 1, max effort lower, day 2, max effort upper, and then day 3, make that your full body dynamic effort training session. That's typically what I do, full body dynamic effort work on day 3. That's what I did this morning, and that's what I've been doing for probably like close to 2 years now. I've been getting some pretty good results with that training split. So Tommaso, thanks for the support of the podcast, man. I'm glad that you're loving it, and great question. And that is the end of this episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. If you guys want to support the podcast, the biggest thing that you can do to support is to leave comments on YouTube, leave comments on Spotify, and leave comments on Instagram, and share this podcast with your favorite training partner. This is like a fully homegrown, organically grown podcast. I don't pay for ads. I don't pay for do paid promotions or anything like that. Like, this is just me here in my kitchen, putting you guys on game because I care about helping you guys get brutally strong, packing on slabs of muscle, and building a gas tank that never gasses out. I love you guys. Hope you guys have an amazing week of training. Lift heavy, roll hard, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.